Welcome to Cannabis Health News Magazine. We're here today with Shawn Coleman from Cannabis Business Alliance. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So there's a lot going on in the industry. Things are all over the place. And one of the big issues that we have today, of course, is banking. The financial situation with the state is interesting because a lot of the industry is not allowed to have money coming in from out of state, but also right now, they're not allowed to deposit the money that they make from the sale of medical cannabis into any bank that is FDIC insured. So what are you working on? And I've talked to a bunch of people about this issue, and I know Cheryl Schumann is coming to town. I know she's very interested in this exact topic. So where are you at, and what's CBA doing to address the banking issue for the industry?
Sure. Well, if I might, I just want to take one step back because
Please do.
It should be understood that it is not illegal under current law for banks to take deposits from medical cannabis businesses.
Right.
And before I was with the Cannabis Business Alliance, I'm the executive director of the Cannabis Business Alliance, which, as you all know, is a trade group for medical marijuana professionals in Colorado. But before that, and actually my beginning in working in marijuana policy was in the office of Congressman Jared Polis in Washington, D.C. I was a legislative assistant. I handled marijuana policy and banking policy. And, which actually turns out is a logical nexus. But when I was in Jared's office, we were investigating this issue for a while, trying to come up with a solution. The congressman did introduce a legislative solution, which I can go into a little bit later. But the thing that I think is the most important for people to understand in terms of the legality of banking in the industry is 15 members of Congress in 2011 sent a letter to the Department of Treasury, to Secretary Geithner, inquiring into this issue to understand what the problem is and how to get a solution. The response from the Secretary of Treasury was, "This isn't us. You guys got to talk to Comptroller of Currency." And we did. And then we got a response, and this is a letter that is dated it was 2010, not 2011. And the letter is from the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, signed by several of the regulators that govern the national banking and financial system. This letter is July 30, 2010. And the most important paragraph in that letter, and I'll read it so people can understand.
That'd be great. Thank you, Sean.
It says, the decision to open, close, or refuse a particular account or relationship should be made by a depository institution without the involvement by its supervisor. An institution must make its own assessment of whether or not to accept an account based on its own business objectives and evaluation of the risk associated with the offering particular products or services to customers or members, as well as its capacity to effectively manage those risks. So
couldn't someone just come back and respond, well, cannabis is federally illegal?
Sure, and they do. That's one of the risks that you, as a financial institution, need to be able to manage. Several institutions have taken a stab at it and decided that for their business purposes, again, it comes down basically to a matter of risk return.
Right. No, real quick, Sean, sorry to jump in there.
Sure.
One of the things that pops up in my mind is some of these cases that have come up with the IRS. So there was a audit done with Harborside Health, for example, Stephen D'Angelo and Andrew D'Angelo's business. Excuse me. And what they said was that anything that was used to produce the product, so lights, anything to manufacture, if you will, that was okay to deduct above the line in terms of writing off for taxes. Now, what they did say was that anything that was up front in terms of sales, that could not be written off. Now, that to me sounds like there's some legitimacy to, mind you guys, I had a concussion yesterday, so I'm a little off today. Sorry about that. Excuse me, boy. But that said, it seems to give some foundation to it.
Well, first I would say that the 280E tax issue and the banking issue are somewhat different in the sense that, well, actually, let's start with the similar. They're both similar in the sense that this is, in one case, the IRS, and on the other hand, financial institutions. And I do want to stress that it's financial institutions, not necessarily banking regulators, but it's financial institutions using laws designed for fighting terrorism and international drug trafficking. That's what these laws are designed for. And so there is also so the counter argument to all of that is that this is a misusage of those laws. And in fact, the legislation that Congressman Polis introduced, which is H.R. 1984, seeks to address that misusage of the. It seeks to.
Sorry, I'm snickering here.
Yeah, well, so there. I should explain that the numbering of that, it has nothing to do with George Orwell. It's actually
I didn't think so.
there were actually three bills introduced on the same day as part of and one of those was 1983, which is Barney Frank's bill, which is the federal decriminalization bill. Then there's H.R. 1984, which is the banking bill. Then H.R. 1985, introduced by California Congressman Pete Stark, which addresses the 280E issue. And both 1983, 84, and 85, all three of those bills actually are bipartisan bills. They are sponsored by Republicans and Democrats, including Republican presidential nominee Ron Paul is a sponsor of, I believe, all three bills. The banking bill and the tax bill, 1983, 1984, and 1985, both kind of try to address this misapplication of rules and laws designed to combat terrorism and international drug trafficking. The way the banking bill addresses it, it says that the trigger that generally alerts a banking regulator that a financial institution has medical marijuana accounts is the Bank Secrecy Act reporting requirement. So, and everyone's familiar with this because you'll go up to your bank teller and they'll see a sign that says, if you are depositing excess of $10,000 in cash, you have to go through X amount of process. That is usually the reporting trigger. And crafting this bill, the Congressman's office worked with the financial services industry to get that input, and that seemed to be the number one concern. That, and again, going back to what that letter says, effectively manage those risks. Though it may seem, and the optics it might be that the financial services industry is fabulously wealthy, the majority of institutions in Colorado that served the industry when they did were smaller state-chartered institutions. So, in that sense, there is a certain compliance cost that's associated with every time one of these BSA things has to be filed, which over time can become, cumbersome and expensive for these smaller institutions. So, and the other issue is there's the issue of opportunity costs of financial institutions that when they're going through a exam for compliance or whether they are going through an exam for the purposes of beginning a new line of business or acquiring or being acquired, they are generally presented with a choice. You can either do X, whatever X might be, whether it be starting a new mortgage program, whether it be consolidating with another institution, or you can do Y, which is continue to offer banking services to the medical cannabis industry. And because of the fact that, as we all know, that these are just small businesses, in effect,
right.
Remove the controversy of it being that their small business is helping patients acquire cannabis to treat their conditions. At the end of the day, they're small businesses. The average center has between
12 employees.
Exactly.
Right.
So these are not businesses that are going to have millions of dollars in their accounts all the time. This is not going to be the case. So the way that banks make money is there's several ways. The most profitable relationship for a financial institution with its customer is a lending relationship. And while it is legal to bank the industry, it's imprudent, I believe, and I think most bankers would say this, to lend to the industry, not because of anything associated with those individuals in the industry, but more importantly because that a business can be zoned out of existence by caprice of a city council, or even yesterday we had the city of Fruita.
So it's a high risk factor.
So the risk factor is that you may engage in this small business lending relationship that is profitable until the business is zoned out of existence, and then how does that work? So so the most profitable relationship for a bank to have with any customer is impossible to have with the medical cannabis industry until the regulatory environment settles down. So then that's out. The second most profitable relationship they can have is merchant processing. And so let's say you're a bank and you're charging something outrageous, like 5% for a credit card or debit card
Just to
swipe.
run a sale.
Just to run a sale. Well, if that's there is a hesitance, I think, among patients to use their electronic payment form
There's a privacy concern
as
there.
a privacy concern. So the first thing is that there's very few transactions to begin with, and then the second thing is those transactions are fairly small. I mean, if the maximum amount that you can purchase is 2 ounces, well, you can do the math. 5% of that over.
You're only looking at about $15, $20 per sale at
It's-
that max sale,
right.
because you're looking at about $320
Right.
for 2 ounces, right?
Exactly. And then the third rationale for a bank to have a customer is again that customer maintains high account balances on a regular basis over quarters.
And this is something we don't see. There's a lot of fluctuation right now.
Right. Well, because I think that as we all know, most of the revenue that these businesses are taking in is spent on their employees, making sure that their employees are having living wages and compliance. And after that, there isn't really much money left around to just sit around in the bank account to make some banker somewhere happy.
Right.
And the reason for that is because, banks, in terms of their own capitalization, and I will say this in defense of banks, some of this is not their fault per se.
Isn't there something else that comes into play here? Because from what I understand, the industry itself is not allowed to take money from outside of the state.
Correct.
And so wouldn't that also create that situation if banks were to lend to the industry within the state of Colorado?
No.
Interesting.
No, it's not a problem in that sense because so long as, well, first, if it's a state-chartered bank, the money, that problem immediately goes away because the monies that are being deposited into the bank from the centers is
state money.
And it's not going anywhere. If someone really was interested in it, that could become a problem in the sense if it's a national bank. But since there's no lending, that's actually not a problem. It would only be a problem for the institution itself if there was some issue or problem with one of the banking customers who happened to be a medical cannabis business, and that and they weren't careful in making sure that the funds that they were receiving, and again, it would have to be a very, very unique situation, and the problem would be for the bank because if all banks, even if they have multiple branches, all the branches are independently numbered. So all the funds that go into that branch, they know where those funds came from, and clearly they came from in the state of Colorado. So it'd have to be and I'm trying to think of exactly the chain of events that would need to happen, and in effect, for this to be a problem, and it'd only be a problem for the bank, not the medical marijuana center itself.
Right.
Would be that for whatever reason, the bank got into some sort of hot water as a result of their relationship, and they weren't able to prove that the funds that they received from that medical cannabis business did not then leave the state somehow. Mm-hmm. So, for example, let's say I'm XYZ National Bank. I do lending in 15 states. I have some auto loans in Kansas or wherever. And then there's some issue based on that loan, that customer, that bank. Well, now, and it can be traced back that I used some capital to finance that loan from the deposits of the medical cannabis customers that I have. That's going to be a problem, but it will only be a problem for the bank. And again, with the current situation for cannabis businesses where they're using most of their money to pay their employees and to comply with the state laws, there's never going to be a business that's going to have such a high account balance that they're using that as capital for lending somewhere else. I mean, if you're making a $10,000 car loan, you need to be using about $40,000 or $50,000 in capital to do it. Most of these businesses don't have that money sitting around in an account.
Right.
So it's one of those things that I think that there is some level of, and I hate to say it this way, but apologetic rationale used by the financial services industry to say explain why they're not doing it. But the real
That's
answer,
what I've been hearing.
the real answer is that it's simply not profitable.
Right.
Don't
you think it would be more appropriate if the banks just came back and said, "Hey, this is not profitable in this model that we're looking at right now"?
It would. Well,
a lot of rumors fly around, obviously, in this industry. We see that a lot. There's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of perception
Sure.
and made up, angles of belief and so on and so forth. I think I'm at the point where, if we put our cards on the table, it seems like we'd be able to move a little bit quicker through the system, and we'd have a lot more support and less problems down the road.
Well, I think there's a couple of things.
Real quick,
Sure.
sorry to jump in there.
Yeah, no worries.
What we're going to do is just take a quick break from our sponsor, Shawn, and we'll be right back. So thank you very much for listening to Cannabis Health News Magazine. We're here with Shawn Coleman from Cannabis Business Alliance, and he is sharing some information about the banking situation and possible solutions. Hopefully we'll come to those with policy making in the process. So we'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Are you a runner? Are you a runner who supports marijuana legalization? Run on Grass is a group of athletes actively seeking to change our marijuana laws. We speak the truth about cannabis, bringing the message through our feet to new ears. Check out runongrass.com to find out more about us, our events, and how to join up or how to sponsor a runner. If you're in the Denver area, please join us for runs or start a group in your area. Running not your thing? Any sport can do it. On grass. Runongrass.com.
Who got it better than me? Better line on the block, rolling VIP. Sick whip, thick rims, fat rocks, I got them. Shining like a superstar from top to bottom. You need a sugar daddy, I'm the Mac. And if you need a dollar, holla, cause I got a whole stack. What? Rolling VIP. What? Rolling VIP.
Better night.
What?
Fries.
Life comes at you fast.
Thank you.
A nationwide annuity could guarantee you income for life.
Nationwide is on your side.
Help defend women's rights in the pursuit of equality. Join Americans all across the United States on April 28, 2012, as we come together as one to tell members of Congress in Washington, D.C. and legislatures in all 50 states enough is enough. All Americans have the right to make a decision about their own bodies, including contraception, without interference from government, business, or religious institutions. Join us at Civic Center Park, April 28 at 10 a.m. www.unitedwomen.net.
The law offices of Edson Maton and Matz provide criminal defense, medical marijuana defense, and advice about setting up and running medical marijuana centers, optional premises cultivation operations, and infused product manufacturing businesses throughout Colorado. With offices in Denver and Aspen, we can offer assistance throughout the entire state of Colorado. Give us a call at 303-831-8188. That's 303-831-8188. Or visit us online at warrenedson.com.
California's Attorney General has determined that the Repeal Cannabis Prohibition Act will save hundreds of millions of dollars from our overburdened justice system while creating hundreds of millions in new tax revenues from new sustainable jobs and industries that are friendly to our environment. But we can't do it without your help. We are seeking your donations to get on the ballot. Please go to repealcannabisprohibition.org to learn more about how you can help. It's time to end the war on cannabis and hemp in California. It's time to end the madness. Paid for by Sensible Californians Incorporated.
And we're back with Cannabis Health News Magazine. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio today. We have Shawn Coleman from Cannabis Business Alliance, and we're talking about the situations with banking in Colorado in regards to the medical marijuana industry, or medical cannabis industry, as we prefer to say. So, Shawn, thanks again for joining us, and sorry to cut you off right before we went to break, but you were just giving us an example in regards to this is not a profitable banking solution right now. I shouldn't call it solution. It's just not profitable, and so a lot of the banks are not choosing to support the industry. I know, we talked about how maybe it would benefit all of us if that were just put on the table in the beginning. But that said, where are we going with the policy? Where are your experiences going to help us in the industry in terms of the state issues, but also is there a relationship to some federal legislation that is also going on?
Yep. So, and I think we were touching on it briefly with the Congressman Poles' bill H.R.
Yes.
1984. The way that addresses the one of the issues, which is the cost of compliance when you have to do these BSA reporting. What it does, what the bill does is, and it's titled the Small Business Banking Improvement Act. The reason why is because this issue doesn't only confront the medical cannabis industry. It does confront other industries, generally considered to be sin industries. For example, in Nevada with legal prostitution, the electronic cigarette industry. But what this bill says is that if a state government has an interest in having a particular industry that is legal under their laws to have access to banking, that through a certification process, those businesses can be exempt and their bank can be exempt from those bank secrecy act reportings. Gotcha. So that's what the bill does. So that would be one solution. There was a bill that unfortunately did not pass this session, and that was introduced by Senator Pat Stedman in the Colorado General Assembly to create a co-op, which is it would function in ways very similar to a credit union, though it would not be a credit union.
Unfortunately, that one was knocked down because of the amendment the banking industry brought in, which would have disallowed electronic transfer, which is basically the foundation of how this all works.
Right. And their arguments, in my view, and I do have some banking background, were very weak arguments. The argument they made was that this institution would put the general financial system in the state at risk, because in the event of that institution being seized, if were to be seized by the federal government, which also I think would be a very unlikely scenario, that any transactions that were still in the pipeline, whether it be a check that was drawn, electronic transfer that was drawn, would then, of course, that money would never show up.
Right.
And so that, the receiving end bank would be out if it was that money was going to a contractor or a utility company, whatever. They would accumulate that loss. Even in the worst case scenario, we're talking about a very small amount of money. Again, certainly not something that would create systemic risk, which was the banking industry's claim. And I think rather this co-op was the exact opposite of creating systemic risk. And this is something that I am fairly familiar with because I worked for the congressman and I was a banking LA during the writing of Dodd-Frank, and that was one of the primary issues we were trying to address, is how do we and even the federal solutions on that bill are guiding the financial services industry. Like, for example, the idea of too big to fail, we actually ended up becoming not too big to fail, but too interconnected to fail. So that if a financial institution regardless of its size and capitalization, if its interconnectivity was too great, then it would be brought into a higher level of regulation, so that if it were to fail, it wouldn't create a systemic risk episode.
A cascade effect.
Right. With the co-op, with this industry, since all of the funds in the industry are within that industry, if the entire we certainly wouldn't want this to happen, but the bigger risk to the institution, I would believe, would be if the entire industry collapsed for some reason. But in that event, the losses would be isolated to that institution, and the nominal amount of exchanges that were in process. I mean, electronic transfers, they happen very quickly. So I mean, it's very unusual that a transfer would
get hung up in the process. It's
not going to if you swipe your debit card, most banks that appears at minimum at latest the next day, and a seizure, so it's basically that day's events would be lost, and it would be a very nominal amount of exposure. Also, I think the thing that they did not mention, and I'm not.
You mean in terms of financial exposure, but
for other onities?
Okay. In terms of media exposure, however, if the government came in and shut down a bank for cannabis industry,
it'd be a bummer.
Use, it would be not only a bummer, but it would. I think it would give a lot more credence to the industry. Honestly.
Well, it's my take on it. My guess, it's an educated guess, but it's a guess nonetheless, is that such an institution would not had that happen in the first place. But
this is worst case scenario, folks. This is
worst case scenario.
What do they say? SHTF kind of thing.
Yeah. But there was another important piece, which I think which was unfortunate that the folks representing the banking industry didn't mention, which is that any bank at any time can refuse payment from anyone for any reason. So
if they see that there's a risky behavior with that business, they have the right to refuse.
It's just what the letter of the Board of Governors said about the banking industry in the first place.
So you brought up that 10,000 mark, and that really is just a possible trigger for potential investigation. That's not to say that every business that deposits over $10,000 that happens with.
Correct.
And so we're in that same situation where people just need to get past. Honestly, it's that personal fear of the stereotype that we've been under for so many years.
That's correct. I mean, because there are a couple of pieces why the bank won't do it. I believe the number one reason why the banks are not doing it, and the real solution is, as the industry matures, the relationship with banking will be more profitable. And that's just true. I mean, and let's not forget that there are plenty of banks right now today that have medical marijuana businesses as customers.
Right. There are still, that's the thing, there are still people who are doing business with banks in Colorado, albeit, under some other name, or the local bank is supportive of the business, or that person had, a personal account with that industry or that bank for so many years. They're just reliable people.
And it's, I am very cautious about, implying that people are banking fraudulently. I don't believe that's the case. I think that the overwhelming amount of medical cannabis businesses that still have active accounts today, their bank knows who they are and what they're doing, and the reason why that relationship still exists is because for some other reason, it's a profitable relationship for the institution, and they do not. The fundamental issue is the opportunity cost. That if banks could have these customers, I mean, there are plenty of low-income people who have bank accounts. Those relationships are not profitable for the bank to have. The reason they have them is because then they have access to that individual for things that are profitable, lending, mortgages, car loans, all those other things. Are their credit card, debit card, where they're getting the 2% every time they swipe it.
And then they also make a lot of money off of low income with the fees from bounce checks and overdrafts.
Exactly. It's the checking account itself is the loss leader. They want to have that relationship so that you do everything else with them as well.
Right.
And as regards to our industry, the loss leader doesn't lead to profitable activity because those profitable activities they actually cannot do.
The lending and so on and so forth. Right.
So as the industry matures, even without legislation, the problem will probably go away over time. But it's a long period of time. I mean, we're talking 5-6 years as the private capital that's in the industry is retired. So when people are paying back personal loans of 20-30%. Well, once those get retired, that's 20-30% of capital that's back in the business. All of a sudden, that's money that we're a bank and say, well, gee, that's a lot of capital that you're just going to be putting in my vault, which I can use for other things. So all of a sudden it becomes more attractive. So I think even without a federal solution, because again, the Congress's bill, and it doesn't change any law. It just clarifies. It gives state governments a little more authority, but it doesn't actually change any federal law.
Right.
So
we don't really need to change any.
We don't need to change. You don't need to change it. That's the underlying issue there, is that it doesn't need to be changed in the first place. What needs to be changed is, again, the maturity of the industry, so that the businesses are just a little more personally healthy. That's gonna help bring this around. That's gonna be the biggest thing, I believe. The other issue is that perception piece. I mean, there are some banks who just don't want to have that association because of their concerns about what the way the other customers will feel about it. I mean, certainly you got to think of it from the perspective of a banker. If I have XYZ MMC's bank account and I have ABC's used car dealership, and for whatever reason, the owner of ABC's used car dealership says, well, I'm uncomfortable with my institution banking with the medical marijuana industry, well, then they'll close those other accounts. Because that is that relationship, because they can lend to that dealer. They can so
you're bringing up a really important component that ties into all of this, and this is something that ties into everything we're doing, and that's the relationship with our community.
Correct.
It's the ancillary businesses that we also support, and so that car dealership is somebody who benefits from our industry because we do have patients that need vehicles and so on and so forth. So it's really in our best interest to create that positive relationship alone on that level, but then you're bringing in a new picture, which is we really want to create that relationship for other reasons, and that could be the support of the banking industry or institution in this case.
And I think that's correct. I mean, like anything new, there's a learning curve, and there's a learning curve for the business owners, there's a learning curve for the public. I think that certainly from the perspective of the cannabis business lines and our efforts in terms of our in terms of what we work with our members in terms of responsible vending, educating patients, becoming members of their community. So within our organization, we encourage folks in terms of their marketing and the design of their business, the storefront, that it matches the community. Like if you are operating in a neighborhood that's very staid, then your building should be very staid. If you're operating in a funky art district, well, then your building should be in a funky art district sort of, like, to really become members
Something
of the
that fits in,
but
melds,
also to
right.
become members of your local chamber of commerce, to have establish good relations with your city council members, your state, your general assembly members for your district, because these are the things that build that credibility. Because it's like anything else, if you don't have knowledge, you will be afraid. And because of the security of these businesses, where the public can't just come in and walk inside and see what it is, they can only imagine. Then the outreach, we need to go to them, because they literally cannot come to us. So it is a matter of becoming a part of your neighborhood group, becoming a part of your chamber of commerce, and being out there in your community so that they can understand what it is that you do. That will go a long way. And to the extent that it impacts banking, I think that the one of the banks that did have a large amount of accounts previously in Colorado Springs, I believe that was because of the great work of folks at the Colorado Springs Medical Cannabis Council. The industry down there, they worked hard with the city council to make sure that those tax revenues are going to literally turning the street lights back on.
Right, and that's a big one. I think that's a lot of information that people really don't know about. Is the street lights were turned on, the garbage collection was kept up, transportation. I think police officers were covered in that. So it was amazing to see how much we do contribute to the community, the greater community. And what you bring up is really critical. The community can't see inside these dispensaries. The only thing they're seeing or hearing is from what the media puts out there or what we do as an industry.
Right.
And that, again, comes back to why we really need to work together as a whole to make the perception what it is, the reality of what this industry is. And so the public does see inside, if you will.
Right.
I know a lot of centers are inviting the public in on certain days where they're doing little community relationship parties or what have you. But these things, I think, are imperative, because at the same time we're also communicating with people who can benefit from the use of medical cannabis.
Correct.
So it's interesting where we're at. We really are starting a brand new community, and it's our responsibility to do that outreach. Now, I was going to ask you, what can we do as citizens of the state or as business owners in the state to help move this banking initiative or the momentum behind the communication along? And so I think we answered one of those questions, and that's that community relationship. Show the public that we are not those scary stereotypes that come out of the back alley. And honestly, Shawn, something that really is amazing to me, and I constantly refer back to this, before I got involved in this industry, before I was arrested and charged with my 2 pounds 2 ounces, actually it was a bigger charge initially, I really thought that the stereotype was this industry. And now that I've been here for almost 3 years and have met people like yourself and people like Warren and so on and so forth, who are hosting the studio, iCannabis Radio, that it's all of us. The stereotype is actually a very small portion of our community of medical cannabis supporters and patients.
Right.
So what else can we do? What can the businesses do to communicate amongst themselves? And I think I would include the groups in that, the business alliances, the committees like MMBA, MMIG, Act for Colorado, and so on and so forth.
Well, I mean, I think that the most critical thing is that while we will always have subtle differences of policy, we need to make sure that those discussions happen respectfully and behind closed doors, so that when we're down there at the Capitol, when legislation that's in favor of our industry, whether it be, this the banking bill, which unfortunately failed,
or we also saw something with the responsible vendor bill.
Exactly, the responsible vendor bill, which is still alive. That's that's got another hearing on the House side on April 18th at 1:30. Whatever our personal differences are, whether it be business to business or organization to organization, that needs to be that can never be at the Capitol. At the Capitol, we need to be unified, and we have to understand that not every win is going to be win by 100 points. Sometimes it's going to be a real marginal win, but the difference is win or lose. And we need to, when we're down there, we need to be unified to the person so that we can continue to have, because all these, none of this happens in a vacuum. You know, the General Assembly is, for one hand, and Congress on the other hand, are political bodies. And people know which industries are the winners and which industries are the losers.
Right.
So, you know, for certainly, we hope that we might be able to at least get some success on the responsible vendor bill. It's not too late. So we certainly encourage people to reach out to their representatives in the House and the Colorado House to encourage them to support that bill and get it out of committee, get it moving again. But in terms of the congressman's bill, you know, certainly right now the only members of the Colorado delegation that are on that bill are Congress Polis and Congress Perlmutter. So, you know, if you're in Denver, you know, reach out to Diana Getz office, ask her to co-sponsor 1984. If you're in Colorado Springs, reach out to Mr. Lamborn or Mr. Gardner or Mr. Tipton, whoever your representative is, and encourage them to become a co-sponsor of that bill. That's what that needs. It needs support to get moving. And then reach out to your friends and colleagues who live in other states and get their, particularly, you know, states that have a medical cannabis law like California. I mean, there's 17 of us if you include the District of Columbia, of course. DC, yeah.
You bring up a really a big, powerful component, and this is something I've been tapping into as a resource for my hemp bill and moving through committee, is reaching out to other states that have already had their own initiatives with hemp or cannabis or whatever it might be. And, for example, we had Representative Monson, Republican from North Dakota, send a letter in testimony for HB 1099, my hemp bill, or the hemp bill, I should say. It's for everybody. It's not just for me. But that said, it does make a difference, and it's something that I didn't really think about. And so to put that out there, folks, don't just reach inside your state. If you are from another state and you've moved to Colorado, reach back to that state and try and network with the legislative body that is present there, because you will find a lot of supporters. There are a lot of DAs or a lot of people across the spectrum that really do support what we're doing.
And to add to that, I mean, there all of those three bills that were introduced in Congress. There are people who co-sponsor those bills who don't live in who don't represent a medical cannabis state. They just understand that they want to be on the right side of history. Because this is where we're going, and that's the way it is. We're not going back. Whether you're going 10 miles an hour or 100 remains to be seen, but they want to be on the right side of the history. They also understand that this is about something else. This is, you know, the finger in the dike. That, you know, in terms of issues that I think, you know, have much broader appeal. States' rights, for example. You know, does a state have the ability to decide, well, we want to have this industry and we want to have them banked? Is that? And I think it's a question.
Yeah.
The answer should be yes, but it's apparently controversial. And
I think it is.
So I think that to the extent that we recognize that our allies are not just within our state and our industry, but also without our state and our industry, that there are just lots of people, particularly in Congress, that just care about the ability of a state to do that. I mean, if you look at, you know, the attorney generals who, you know, are suing on the healthcare law, whether you agree with their position or not, their position is, well, this is about our state and our state's ability to do whatever it is. This is the same issue. And to the extent that we can enlist folks from other states who are sympathetic, and particularly in our state, who are sympathetic to that general concept of, you know, it's not about whether or not I agree or disagree with any particular law. It's a matter of, does my state actually have the right to do it? One thing when Jan Brewer, that famous picture of Jan Brewer with her finger in the president's face when he got off the plane in Arizona on the immigration issue, you know, a lot of people were upset about that. Because it, you know, out of respect for the office of the presidency, but also because I think that some of the underlying upset was because those people fundamentally disagree with the governor's position. I do as well. But I did say to folks, well, just imagine that exact same image with Governor Hickenlooper talking about the closure of medical cannabis businesses in our state. With Governor Hickenlooper going to the president, hey, look, my state has a law that my voters and our citizens passed. Coloradans want a medical cannabis industry. It's been said so by the voters and by the General Assembly twice. So
this is interesting.
It just changes that image. I think if you make Jan Brewer, John Hickleman, that it becomes a very different image for folks.
Sure. And you bring up all sorts of other issues. Like you said, it's the finger in the dike. This is exposing healthcare issues, cannabis issues, the right to what's in our food, the soil, the air, so on and so forth.
Immigration, agriculture, land use. I mean, you name
employment. I mean, this covers everything. And I think this is empowering a lot of people, showing people we can get something done, let alone we have taken cannabis, which was completely illegal and something that was frowned upon, to something that's now accepted. It's now recognized as a medical use as an herb. The other big thing here that we come back to in the bigger picture is, and I know we're just about to run out of time here, is aside from the banking, aside from I don't mean to belittle these things because everything is really important, but we also see John Walsh sending letters to the state asking centers to shut down. I say asking or telling, I should say, but I don't see any real foundation behind what they're doing. Again, coming back to the issue of states' rights. That said, we do have Stan Garnett, DA Stan Garnett, excuse me. Again, there's that head block happening. DA Stan Garnett has stood up multiple times now, and I won't say in our defense, but in the defense of reality, and he points out that we really have other bigger issues to pay attention to in terms of crime.
Correct.
And I think that's a very, very important thing to come back to. This is not just about getting medicine to people, but it's about refocusing what society should be worried about.
Right. Well, I mean, first I want to say that, Stan Garnett should be celebrated for his actions.
Yes,
I mean he's actually been a total champion of this, and he's absolutely correct.
Did you know that he was the prosecutor that prosecuted my case?
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
World's coming full circle, huh?
Yeah, both ways, too.
Yeah. So I just want to say that because that's important to say. But in terms of the bigger picture, for example, if you care about ending the importation of methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin into our state, by that virtue, you are a supporter of a regulated medical cannabis industry because that is a piece of the puzzle. These other drugs that are absolutely dangerous, and we should take efforts to keep out of the hands of vulnerable populations. The mechanism that finances their transportation is the illegal black market sale of cannabis. So if you want to stop that activity, then you want a medical cannabis. And so these are the sorts of things that we like putting the pieces together for people who are outside of our community, outside of our industry, so they understand that if you're in some community somewhere and you say, well, I'm going to vote against having medical marijuana licenses, that means that for every plant that's not grown under a light, is grown in the basement, or comes in on a truck from outside of the state or outside of the country.
And it facilitates all the other illegal drugs.
So that's what you're voting for. You're voting, the choices are legal, regulated marketplace or dangerous, illegal marketplace.
And this is simple to create a reference for. We had Prohibition for alcohol back in the beginning of the 20th century.
Right.
And we saw where that brought us and what had to be done.
Yeah, so, and it's interesting to talk about because, I believe that the optics socially and in the public are certainly much more similar to Prohibition than anything else. But in terms of the long-term legislative strategy for national reform, the model is actually the Civil War, which is getting a critical mass of states that disagree with the federal government but agree with each other. And right now we're at 17.
Wow. So you're not saying that we need to go to war, are you?
No, I'm not saying that.
No, I'm kidding.
What I'm saying is that in Congress, the reason why the 3 bills that were introduced aren't getting traction is because as a issue to care about, most members of Congress simply don't care about marijuana as an issue.
So I appreciate your reference to the Civil War because this really is literally, I hate to say it this way, but a black and white issue.
Right.
And there's a lot of profound reference in terms of how we've gotten here today. We could look back at the gay rights movement and Harvey Milk and civil rights movement with Martin Luther King and so on and so forth. All those movements have given us tools to do what we're doing today. And I think we need to not only respect who those individuals were in terms of their carrying a message for everybody, but also providing those tools to us. And so it's interesting you bring up that civil rights reference. Now, here's where this is bringing us back to why I brought this up. From what I understand, we need 38 states for a constitutional convention. So would this be a little bit different?
Well, yeah, it is, because I don't think that, again, it doesn't require changing the Constitution. I mean,
so this is an administrative change.
This is a legislative change.
Okay.
And what most people think is that once we get to that critical mass of states, that since most members of Congress today don't care about, it's not that they're opposed to it, they just don't care about cannabis as an issue. If they get to that critical amount of states where it becomes a constituent issue for them, where my constituents are now impacted, affected, they're still not going to want to go out saying cannabis, whether it be medical, recreational, whatever it is great. They want to not talk about it, and the best way to not talk about that is to defederalize it, to say that it's not an issue that the federal government is involved in. That's an issue for states to decide for themselves. It's very similar to what they ended up doing in Prohibition. It wasn't that the Congress said, yeah, beer is great. It said, oh, we just don't care about beer anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we're at 17 states, if you count the District of Columbia.
So D.C., real quick to jump in again,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there's so many little tangents here, but D.C. is an interesting situation because it is a medical state that was given approval, or it was decided on by the Congress, correct?
Correct. Well,
so isn't that federal? Doesn't that then say that medical cannabis is legal for everybody?
No.
Not to get into a whole tangent there. But.
No. And I think I can knock this out pretty quick. But the reason for that is that the District of Columbia, all of its funding is appropriated to it by Congress.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever they have an election and they want to count the ballots and certify the election, that takes money that the city has to spend in order to do that. That money has to be appropriated by Congress.
Gotcha.
So their medical cannabis law was passed years ago, and it was only 2 years ago that the funds they already knew the results. They knew that it passed, and what happened is then the appropriation for D.C., they just refused to give them the money to do it. That logjam finally broke, and that's why things are running. So, if we can get, states like New York, Ohio, Illinois, and Florida to our side of the ledger, then I think we'll be there. Otherwise, I think it's going to be about 30 states. But I do believe that when we get to that critical mass, whatever that number is, that it will become an issue that is left for the states to decide as it ought to be. And I think that's, again, why I think some of our biggest allies outside of the industry are those who are fighting for states' rights. We may not agree with them on all of their platforms, but I think certainly on this issue, they are an ally.
So sorry to jump in here, but we are out of time for the show, and I hope to have you back, Shawn.
Sure,
this
absolutely.
is really, you touch on a lot of things, and there are a lot of branches that this topic and conversation can take us. And that said, there's probably a couple more pieces to this that we should probably cover in some later shows.
Sure.
And as we move forward with what's happening with this legislative session, I have a feeling that we're going to have some more information to bring to the table. So Shawn Coleman from Cannabis Business Alliance, thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure to be here. And we're at an exciting time, and we just need to, stay the course and make sure that we're working together.
Where can people learn more about CBA, Cannabis Business Alliance?
At cannabisalliance.org.
All right, great. So cannabisalliance.org for those of you on the internet, and you're probably listening to us right now on the internet. So go ahead and click on over, read more about CBA, and see how you can help out. And we'll have Shawn back in the studio, hopefully with a couple others next time, too. We can create a really dynamic situation here.
That'd be great.
So you've been listening to iCannabis Radio and Cannabis Health News Magazine, and Jason Love is your host with a concussion. We pulled it off, and so Chris Custer, our producer, sat it out this evening, so you can call me producer too. So thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, and we'll have you back in the studio in a little bit, Shawn. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.